The light was beginning to fade across the vast wilderness of Yellowstone National Park. Golden hour, that magical time when the sun's rays turn the landscape into a canvas of amber and shadow, was giving way to the encroaching darkness of an early September evening. Tourists were heading back to their campgrounds or lodges, cameras filled with snapshots of geysers, wildlife and panoramic vistas that would soon become cherished memories of America's first national park. But for the Mitchell family, Yellowstone would become something else entirely, the setting of one of the most perplexing disappearances in the park's 31. The date was September 18th. The summer tourist season was winding down, though the park still buzzed with visitors taking advantage of the pleasant temperatures before fall truly set in. James Mitchell, 42, his wife Katherine, 39, and their two children, Emma, 15, and Tyler, 12, had been enjoying their vacation, a 7-day trip that had been meticulously planned for nearly a year. It was a much-needed escape from their lives in Portland, Oregon, where James worked as a civil engineer and Katherine as a high school guidance counselor. The Mitchells' red 2001 Ford Explorer was discovered 2 days later, on September 10, parked at the Ferry Falls Trailhead, a popular day hiking spot in the park's lower geyser basin. Inside the vehicle, rangers found maps marked with highlighted trails, 2 empty water bottles, a disposable camera with half its frames used, and Katherine's purse containing her wallet, driver's license, and $20.38 in cash. The keys were still in the ignition. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no broken windows. Nothing to indicate what might have happened to the family of 4 who had seemingly vanished without a trace. It was as if they had simply stepped out of their vehicle for a quick look around and never returned, said Chief Ranger Daniel Norris, who supervised the initial search operation. We see this kind of thing from time to time. Visitors get disoriented, wander off trail, maybe get injured, but an entire family. That was unusual. Unusual would soon prove to be an understatement. The Mitchell family had checked into the Old Faithful Inn on September 5. According to the hotel registry, they had reserved a second-floor room with 2 queen beds for 5 nights. The family had breakfast in the hotel's dining room each morning before setting off on daily excursions throughout the park. Staff described them as friendly, polite, and seemingly enjoying their vacation. Lisa Jacobson, a waitress who served the family breakfast on the morning of September 8, their final day, recalled nothing out of the ordinary. They were planning to visit the geysers in the lower basin, she said in her statement to park rangers. The kids were excited about seeing Ferry Falls. The father asked about how difficult the hike would be, and I remember telling him it was pretty easy, even for kids. Receipts and eyewitness accounts placed the family at the Old Faithful geyser viewing area around 11:30 a.m., where they joined dozens of other tourists to watch the famous eruption. A German couple, the Schwartzes, took a photo that inadvertently captured the Mitchells standing near the wooden boardwalk. The image would later become iconic in the coverage of the case, the last known photograph of the family alive. In it, Katherine has her arm around Emma's shoulders. Tyler is pointing at something off-camera. James is checking what appears to be a map or brochure. They look happy, normal, unaware of what awaited them. At 1:17 p.m., James used his credit card to purchase lunch at a small deli near the Old Faithful Visitor Center. The receipt showed an order for 4 sandwiches, chips, and drinks. After that, the family's movements become harder to track. A park shuttle driver believed he saw them boarding his bus for the lower geyser basin around 2:30 p.m., but security camera footage from the shuttle was too grainy to make a positive identification. What is known is that at some point that afternoon, the Mitchells drove their Ford Explorer to the Ferry Falls Trailhead parking lot. The trail itself is approximately a 5-mile round trip and leads to a spectacular 200-foot waterfall cascading down a cliff of volcanic rock. Under normal circumstances, the hike would take about 2 to 3 hours to complete. The Mitchells never returned to their hotel room that night. Their luggage remained untouched. Their toothbrushes still stood in a plastic cup in the bathroom. Katherine's contact lens case sat open on the counter, half filled with solution. It wasn't until the following evening, September 9, that hotel staff noticed the family hadn't returned. After a cursory check of the room showed their belongings still present, the front desk called park rangers to report the family overdue. Initial concerns were moderate. It wasn't uncommon for visitors to spontaneously change their plans or even decide to camp out under the stars, though doing so without proper equipment would have been ill-advised. Rangers first checked local hospitals and other accommodations within the park to see if the family had simply relocated. When those inquiries turned up empty, rangers began a cursory search of popular trails and attractions. It was early the next morning, September 10, when a patrol spotted the Mitchell's Ford Explorer at the Fairy Falls parking area. And that's when the real search began. Yellowstone National Park encompasses 2.2 million acres of wilderness, an area larger than the states of Rhode Island and Delaware combined. Its terrain ranges from dense forests and open meadows to steep mountains, deep canyons, and geothermal features that can be as beautiful as they are deadly. Searching for missing persons in such an environment is, to put it mildly, challenging. We initiated a Type 1 search response immediately, explained Ranger Norris. That means bringing in every available ranger, search dog teams, mounted patrols, and helicopter support. When a family with children is missing, we throw everything we have at it. The initial search focused on the Fairy Falls Trail and the surrounding area within a 5-mile radius. Search and rescue teams methodically combed through the landscape, calling out the names of the missing family members and looking for any sign of their passage: disturbed vegetation, personal items, or tracks. By the evening of September 11, more than 120 personnel were involved in the search, including volunteers from local search and rescue organizations. The weather had remained clear and relatively warm, which gave rescuers hope that if the Mitchells had simply become lost, they could survive until found. But as the search expanded and days passed with no sign of the family, that hope began to wane. The first 72 hours are critical in any missing persons case, said FBI Special Agent Thomas Rurdon, who was called in when the possibility of foul play couldn't be ruled out. With each passing hour, the statistical likelihood of finding someone alive decreases significantly. The FBI's involvement raised the profile of the case considerably. Local and national media began reporting on the story, and the mysterious disappearance of an entire family in America's most famous national park captured public attention. The Mitchell family's background was scrutinized for any clues that might explain their disappearance. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues in Portland were interviewed. Their financial records, phone records, and internet history were examined. What emerged was the portrait of a stable, happy, middle-class family with no obvious problems that might explain their sudden vanishing. James and Katherine had been married for 17 years. They had met as undergraduates at Oregon State University and settled in Portland after graduation. James had worked for the same civil engineering firm for over a decade and was well regarded by his colleagues. Katherine had been a guidance counselor at Roosevelt High School for 8 years and was described by the principal as dedicated, compassionate, and universally loved by students. Emma was a sophomore at Roosevelt, where she played violin in the orchestra and ran cross-country. Tyler was in 7th grade at Beaumont Middle School, where he was known for his interest in science and computers. Both children had good grades and active social lives. The family attended a Presbyterian church semi-regularly. They owned their home in the Irvington neighborhood of Portland. Their credit score was excellent, and they had no unusual debt. James's life insurance policy was modest and had been unchanged for years. Neither James nor Katherine had any criminal record beyond a speeding ticket James had received in. In short, there were no red flags to suggest the family had reasons to disappear voluntarily, or that someone might wish them harm. "We looked at everything," Agent Reardon would later say. Financial problems, marital issues, troubled kids, enemies at work, religious extremism, drug use, mental health issues, you name it, we investigated. The Mitchells were as normal and stable as any family could be. The only potentially relevant detail investigators uncovered was that James had recently been part of a team reviewing environmental impact assessments for a controversial development project near Portland. Some of his colleagues mentioned he had been concerned about pressure to approve the project despite potential environmental risks. However, there was no evidence that his concerns had escalated to threats or that the project was connected to the family's disappearance. As the investigation continued, the search in Yellowstone grew larger. By September 15, 1 week after the Mitchells were last seen, the search area had expanded to cover nearly 30 square miles around the Fairy Falls trailhead. Specialized teams were sent to explore nearby canyons, thermal areas, and waterways. The backcountry of Yellowstone in early September can be treacherous despite its beauty. Though daytime temperatures were mild, nights could drop into the 30s. The park is home to grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, and mountain lions. Thermal features hot springs, mud pots, and geysers present their own dangers, with water temperatures that can exceed 200 degrees Fahrenheit and thin crusts of earth that can break under a person's weight, plunging them into scalding water below. Yet despite the comprehensive search efforts, not a single definitive trace of the Mitchell family was found along the Fairy Falls Trail or in the surrounding wilderness. No clothing, no backpacks, no footprints that could conclusively be linked to them. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. On September 18, 10 days after the Mitchells disappeared, the official search was scaled back. While not formally called off, the number of personnel actively searching was reduced, and efforts shifted to targeted searches of specific areas based on new information or leads, which were becoming increasingly scarce. The case remained open, however, and park rangers continued to brief all field personnel to be on the lookout for any sign of the missing family. Posters with the Mitchells' photographs were displayed at every visitor center, ranger station, and entrance gate throughout the park. Similar posters went up in surrounding communities in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. The disappearance had by now become national news. Cable news networks ran segments on the mystery, and several true crime programs featured the case. Internet forums dedicated to missing persons cases buzzed with theories and speculation. Some believed the family had encountered a criminal in the backcountry, perhaps a drifter, or someone with nefarious intent who had been hiding out in the park. Others suggested they might have witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, like a drug drop or some other illegal activity. More extreme theories proliferated as well. Some speculated about government conspiracies, alien abductions, or supernatural phenomena. Yellowstone, with its otherworldly geothermal features and vast wilderness, has long been a magnet for such theories. One persistent rumor, never substantiated, claimed that James Mitchell had been secretly working on a government project related to geothermal energy and had discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Law enforcement officials dismissed such theories as unhelpful distractions. They continued to focus on more plausible explanations. The family had become lost and succumbed to the elements. They had encountered a dangerous animal. They had fallen victim to a geological hazard like a thermal feature or landslide, or they had been met with foul play at the hands of another person or persons. Yet none of these theories fully explained the complete absence of evidence. Even if the Mitchells had met with a tragic end in the wilderness, some trace should have remained, some item of clothing, a backpack, or physical remains. The lack of any such evidence fueled both the official investigation and public fascination with the case. As September gave way to October, hope of finding the Mitchell family alive had all but evaporated. The focus shifted to determining what had happened to them and, if possible, recovering their remains to provide closure for their extended family and friends. James's parents, retired school teachers living in Eugene, Oregon, traveled to Yellowstone to meet with investigators and make a public plea for information. Katherine's sister flew in from Chicago to join them. The press conference, held at park headquarters on October 3, was emotional and difficult. Our son, his wife, "And our grandchildren are good people," said Robert Mitchell, James's father, his voice breaking. "Whatever happened to them, they didn't deserve it. If anyone knows anything, please come forward. And if someone is responsible for their disappearance, God will judge you for what you have done." The press conference generated another flurry of media attention and tips, but none led to a breakthrough in the case. Until October, in the remote northeastern corner of Yellowstone, approximately 25 miles as the crow flies from the Ferry Falls trailhead, a motion-activated trail camera captured an image that would forever change the trajectory of the investigation. The camera had been set up by wildlife researchers from Montana State University who were studying wolf movements in the park. It was one of dozens placed strategically throughout Yellowstone's vast backcountry, designed to trigger when motion was detected, day or night. This particular camera was positioned along an infrequently used game trail that ran alongside Pebble Creek in an area rarely visited by tourists due to its remoteness and difficult access. The researchers typically collected the memory cards from their cameras once a month, downloading the images to study wolf behavior, population dynamics, and territory. When researcher Allison Ward retrieved the memory card from the Pebble Creek camera on October 12, she expected to find the usual assortment of wildlife images: wolves, elk, maybe a bear or moose. Instead, she found something that sent a chill down her spine. At 3:17 a.m. on September 27, 19 days after the Mitchell family disappeared, the camera captured a blurry but discernible human figure moving through the forest. The infrared flash illuminated a person wearing what appeared to be a distinctive blue and black jacket, the same type of North Face jacket that James Mitchell had been wearing in the last known photo of the family at Old Faithful. The figure was moving away from the camera, face not visible, but the physical build suggested an adult male. They were moving with purpose, not like someone lost or injured, heading deeper into one of the most remote sections of the park. Ward immediately contacted park rangers, who brought the image to the attention of the FBI. Digital enhancement confirmed what they suspected: the jacket matched the one James had been wearing, down to a distinctive patch on the right shoulder where the material had been repaired. But if this was indeed James Mitchell, where was the rest of his family? And why would he be alone in the wilderness, miles from where they had disappeared, nearly 3 weeks later? The discovery electrified the investigation. A new search was immediately launched in the Pebble Creek area, with dog teams, helicopters, and dozens of searchers combing the rugged terrain. FBI profilers were consulted, and the possibility that James might somehow be involved in his family's disappearance, a theory that had been considered but deemed unlikely based on all available evidence, was reluctantly revisited. "We had to consider all possibilities," Agent Reardon explained. "The image changed things. If it was indeed James Mitchell alone in the backcountry weeks after the disappearance, we needed to understand why." The family's friends and relatives rejected any suggestion that James could have harmed his wife and children. They insisted that the man in the image, if it was James, must be under duress or experiencing extreme disorientation from trauma, exposure, or injury. "James adored his family," said Katherine's sister Jennifer Walsh. "There is no scenario, none, where he would hurt them. If that's him in that photo, then something terrible happened, and he's either lost, confused, or being forced to be out there." As October wore on, the new search area yielded no further signs of James or the rest of the Mitchell family. The trail camera image remained the only tangible evidence of any of the Mitchells since their disappearance. Then, on October 28, another camera, this one positioned near a geothermal area known as the Mud Volcano, roughly halfway between Ferry Falls and Pebble Creek, captured a second image. This time, the figure was closer to the camera and more clearly visible. It was a female wearing a red fleece pullover, identical to the one Katherine Mitchell had been wearing in the Old Faithful photo. Her hair was matted, her face smeared with what appeared to be dirt or mud, and she was looking directly at the camera with an expression that investigators would later describe as vacant and haunted. Most disturbing of all, She appeared to be alone, no sign of her husband or children. The discovery of this second image sent shockwaves through the investigation team. If both James and Katherine were alive and moving separately through the Yellowstone backcountry, what did that mean for their children? And why weren't they together? At this point, we had more questions than answers, said Ranger Norris. The images suggested that at least 2 members of the family had survived whatever initial incident led to their disappearance. But their behavior moving alone at night in different areas of the park was completely inexplicable. Psychological experts consulted by the FBI offered various theories. Perhaps the family had experienced something traumatic that caused them to separate. Maybe they were suffering from extreme disorientation due to hypothermia, dehydration, or consumption of toxic plants or mushrooms that induced hallucinations or paranoia. Some even suggested a folie à deux, a shared psychotic disorder that might have caused the parents to behave irrationally and become separated from each other and their children. None of these theories fully satisfied investigators, and none explained the most pressing question: where were Emma and Tyler? As Halloween approached, Yellowstone began to empty of tourists. The park remains open year-round, but visitor numbers drop dramatically as winter approaches, with many facilities closing for the season. By early November, snow would begin to accumulate, making much of the backcountry inaccessible except by snowmobile, ski, or snowshoe. The investigation team knew their window for finding the Mitchell children before winter set in was rapidly closing. The discovery of the trail camera images had renewed public interest in the case, and volunteers from surrounding communities offered to help with the search. On November 2, a search team consisting of park rangers and volunteers was exploring a densely forested area near Nez Perce Creek, roughly equidistant from where both James and Katherine had been photographed. The area featured several small caves and rock shelters that could potentially serve as rudimentary protection from the elements. It was volunteer searcher Michael Delaney, a retired Forest Service employee from West Yellowstone, who made the discovery. Inside a shallow cave formed by a rock overhang, he found what appeared to be a makeshift camp. A torn emergency blanket, the kind available in basic first aid kits, was spread on the ground. Nearby lay an empty water bottle of the same brand found in the Mitchells' abandoned Ford Explorer. Most significantly, tucked into a crevice in the rock wall, was a small digital camera, a Sony Cybershot, silver in color, with visible damage to its exterior. The camera was immediately transported to an FBI field office, where technicians were able to recover images from its memory card despite the damage to the device. The photos it contained would prove to be the most disturbing evidence yet in the increasingly bizarre case of the missing Mitchell family. The first several dozen images on the camera were exactly what one would expect from a family vacation in Yellowstone. Smiling photos at park landmarks, wildlife spotted from a safe distance, geysers erupting, the children posing on boardwalks with thermal features in the background. The final series of photos, however, told a different story. Timestamped at 6:49 p.m. on September 8, the day the family disappeared. The images appeared to have been taken along the Ferry Falls Trail, after most day hikers would have left the area. They showed Emma and Tyler standing near a small thermal feature just off the main trail, steam rising around them in the fading daylight. Their expressions were not of enjoyment or wonder, but anxiety. In the next image, taken just seconds later, Katherine could be seen in the distance, moving rapidly toward the children, her face a mask of concern. James was not visible in the frame. The final 3 photos on the camera were blurry, as if taken while the photographer was moving quickly or experiencing distress. They showed fragments of the forest floor, a partial image of what might have been a human figure moving between trees in the distance, and finally a close-up of the ground covered with footprints that appeared to be running or moving quickly. The timestamps on these last photos spanned just 47 seconds. Forensic analysts examined the images exhaustively, enhancing and analyzing every pixel for clues. What they determined with reasonable certainty was that in the penultimate image, the one showing a figure moving between trees. The subject was neither James, Katherine, Emma, nor Tyler. The height and build suggested an adult male, but the image quality was too poor to discern specific features. The photos suggest the family encountered someone or something that caused them distress, said Agent Reardon. Whether this was another hiker, a park employee, or someone else entirely, we can't say with certainty. But it appears to have occurred right around the time they vanished. The discovery of the camera and its contents redirected the investigation once again. Rangers and FBI agents began interviewing every park employee who had been working in the Lower Geyser Basin area on September. They also reviewed records of backcountry permits issued for the area, though most of the Fairy Falls Trail was considered a day hiking route that didn't require special permits. A critical question emerged. If the Mitchell family had encountered someone threatening on the trail, why were James and Katherine now apparently wandering separately in the park's backcountry weeks later? And where were Emma and Tyler? The case had become a puzzle with pieces that didn't seem to fit together no matter how investigators arranged them. As November progressed and the first significant snowfalls blanketed Yellowstone, the ground search for the Mitchell children was reluctantly suspended. Aerial searches continued when weather permitted, but the likelihood of spotting anything in the snow-covered landscape was minimal. The investigation shifted focus to analyzing the evidence they had and pursuing leads outside the park. The FBI established a dedicated tip line for the case and created a detailed timeline of the family's known movements, the discoveries of the trail camera images, and the recovery of the digital camera. On November 18, a new development arose from an unexpected source. A ranger at Grand Teton National Park, just south of Yellowstone, reported that a backpack had been found by hikers near Jackson Lake, approximately 50 miles from where the Mitchells had disappeared. The backpack, a purple JanSport with a distinctive butterfly patch, matched the description of the one Emma Mitchell had been carrying in Yellowstone. Inside the backpack, investigators found a notebook with Emma's name inside the cover. The notebook contained typical teenage entries about school, friends, and family from before the vacation. The final entry, dated September 8, 2003, was brief but chilling. "Dad's acting weird since we met that ranger this morning. Mum says it's nothing, but I can tell she's worried too. The ranger said something about the thermal pools, and Dad got all quiet. Now he wants to take us to see something off-trail. Tyler's excited, but I have got a bad feeling." The entry ended there, with no further explanation of what the ranger had said or what James wanted to show his family. Park employment records were immediately reviewed, but no ranger reported having a significant interaction with the Mitchell family that day. Moreover, all rangers on duty in the relevant areas of the park had been interviewed previously, and none mentioned any contact with the Mitchells. The notebook entry raised the possibility that someone may have been impersonating a park ranger, explained Ranger Norris. "We take that very seriously. If someone was posing as a ranger to lure visitors into remote areas, that represents a significant public safety threat." The FBI expanded its investigation to include all reported missing persons in Yellowstone and surrounding national parks over the previous 5 years. They discovered that while disappearances were not uncommon, the vast wilderness claimed lives through accidents, exposure, and wildlife encounters every year. There were no previous cases with a pattern similar to the Mitchells. However, they did identify 3 separate incidents over the previous 2 summers, where visitors reported being approached by a friendly ranger who wasn't wearing a standard uniform, but carried what appeared to be official identification. In each case, the individual had suggested the visitors check out unmarked thermal features away from established trails. Fortunately, all had declined the invitation. These reports had been documented but not connected until the Mitchell case brought them to light. None of the visitors could provide a detailed description of the supposed ranger beyond male, middle-aged, with a beard, and very knowledgeable about the park's geology. The discovery of Emma's backpack and notebook entry, combined with these previous reports, led investigators to develop a new theory. The Mitchell family may have been targeted by someone impersonating a park employee who led them into a remote area for unknown purposes. This theory, while disturbing, still didn't explain the subsequent trail camera photos of James and Katherine in different areas of the park weeks later, nor the continued absence of any sign of the children. As November turned to December and snow continued to accumulate throughout Yellowstone, the likelihood of finding any of the Mitchells alive diminished. Yet the trail camera images proved that at least James and Katherine had survived the initial incident, whatever it may have been. The investigation continued through the winter months of 2003-2004, though the on-the-ground search in Yellowstone was largely suspended until spring thaw. FBI agents followed leads across the country, investigating everyone from disgruntled former park employees to known offenders with histories of wilderness crimes. They even looked into James Mitchell's work on environmental impact assessments, pursuing the theory that he might have uncovered something related to Yellowstone's geology or resources that made him and his family targets. Yet no clear motive or suspect emerged. Winter in Yellowstone is a season of extremes. Temperatures regularly drop well below zero. Snow accumulates to depths of several feet. Many roads close entirely, and access to the interior of the park is limited to snowmobiles and snow coaches. The landscape transforms into a stark, frozen wilderness, where survival without proper equipment and shelter is measured in hours, not days. If any of the Mitchells were still in the park when winter set in, their chances of survival were virtually non-existent. Yet as December passed and January arrived, sporadic reports came in from winter employees and visitors of strange occurrences in the park. A snowmobile guide reported seeing footprints leading from a boardwalk into the woods near the Norris Geyser Basin, miles from any area where someone should have been walking in winter conditions. A couple staying at the Snow Lodge near Old Faithful claimed to have seen a woman matching Katherine's description watching the lodge from the tree line at dusk, only to disappear when they called out to her. None of these sightings could be verified, and many were likely the result of the heightened awareness the case had created among those in the park. When a disappearance captures public attention, sightings often multiply as people become hypervigilant and interpret ordinary occurrences through the lens of the case. Yet the official investigation couldn't dismiss these reports entirely, especially given the trail camera evidence that at least 2 members of the family had been alive weeks after their initial disappearance. In late January 2004, nearly 5 months after the Mitchells vanished, a winter researcher studying thermal features near the Mud Volcano area made a grim discovery. Partially buried in snow at the edge of a small thermal pool was a child's shoe, a blue and gray New Balance sneaker, size 6, that matched the description of the shoes Tyler Mitchell had been wearing when he disappeared. The area around the thermal pool was carefully excavated, but no other evidence was found. The shoe itself showed signs of exposure to high heat and minerals consistent with having been in or near a hot spring, but there were no human remains in or around the pool. The discovery of Tyler's shoe in proximity to a thermal feature lent credence to the theory that the family may have encountered some sort of accident involving Yellowstone's dangerous geothermal areas. Yet this still didn't explain the trail camera photos of James and Katherine weeks later, nor Emma's backpack being found in Grand Teton National Park. The evidence we had was like pieces from different puzzles, Agent Reardon would later recall. We had a family disappearance, apparent survival of at least 2 family members, evidence suggesting a possible predator impersonating a ranger, a child's shoe near a thermal feature, and a teenage girl's backpack 50 miles away. None of it cohered into a single logical narrative. As winter maintained its grip on Yellowstone, the investigation continued its methodical work. The Mitchell family's extended relatives kept the case in the public eye through interviews, a website dedicated to finding their loved ones, and eventually a modest reward for information leading to answers. James's employer announced they would keep his position open indefinitely. Katherine's school placed a memorial bench on campus but emphasized it was in her honor, not memory, as they had not given up hope of her return. The children's schools held fundraisers to contribute to the reward fund and the ongoing search efforts planned for spring. But as the months passed, hope faded. The prevailing sentiment among both the public and many investigators was that the full truth of what happened to the Mitchell family would likely never be known. Then, in early March 2004, as the first signs of spring began to appear at the lower elevations of Yellowstone, a third trail camera image surfaced, one that would add the most disturbing chapter yet to the already baffling case. The camera, positioned near a remote thermal area in the park's Hayden Valley, captured an image of what appeared to be two figures moving together through a small clearing at 2:14 a.m. on March 3rd. The infrared flash illuminated them clearly enough to identify that one was wearing what looked like Katherine Mitchell's red fleece pullover. The other wore a tattered jacket that resembled the one Emma had worn in the last confirmed photos of the family. Their faces were not clearly visible, but the height difference between the figures suggested an adult and adolescent. They were walking hand in hand, moving with purpose across the snowy landscape in the middle of the night, in temperatures that would have been well below freezing. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be heading toward one of Yellowstone's most dangerous thermal areas, a section of unstable ground with numerous hot springs and mud pots hidden beneath deceptively solid-looking snow. The image was time-stamped just 8 days before it was discovered. If it truly showed Katherine and Emma Mitchell, they had somehow survived in Yellowstone's backcountry through one of the harshest winters on record, a feat that experienced wilderness experts deemed nearly impossible without substantial equipment and supplies. At this point, we had to consider explanations beyond the conventional, admitted Ranger Norris. Either these individuals had access to supplies and shelter we hadn't discovered, or the images weren't showing us what we thought they were. Indeed, some investigators began to question whether the figures in the trail camera images were actually the Mitchells at all. Perhaps someone had found their clothing and was wearing it. Perhaps the resemblance was coincidental. Perhaps, though no one wanted to voice this theory publicly, someone was deliberately toying with the investigation by planting false evidence. Yet, forensic analysis of the images consistently indicated that the physical builds and gaits of the figures matched what would be expected of the Mitchell family members. Facial recognition software, though hampered by the quality of the night vision images, suggested a high probability that the figures were indeed James, Katherine, and now possibly Emma. As March progressed and more of Yellowstone became accessible, a massive search operation was planned for the spring thaw. Law enforcement agencies from multiple jurisdictions committed resources. Volunteer search and rescue teams from across the country prepared to converge on the park. The case that had begun as a routine missing persons report had evolved into one of the most perplexing mysteries in Yellowstone's history. "We are going to find answers," vowed Agent Reardon at a press conference on March 25, 2004. "Whatever happened to the Mitchell family, we will uncover the truth. We owe them that much." What no one could anticipate was that the truth would prove stranger and more terrifying than anyone had imagined. As the snows began to recede in April 2004, revealing the landscape that had been hidden for months, search teams mobilized across Yellowstone. The operation focused on 3 primary areas: the thermal feature where Tyler's shoe had been found, the locations where the trail cameras had captured images of what appeared to be family members, and the connecting corridors between these points. On April 12, the first significant discovery was made. In a small cave formation near the Mud Volcano area, searchers found what appeared to be a temporary shelter. A tarp had been stretched across the cave entrance, secured with rocks. Inside, they found a nest of pine boughs covered with a space blanket, several empty food wrappers from items that could have been purchased at park concessions, and a small journal bound in black leather. The journal did not bear a name, but the handwriting matched samples of Katherine Mitchell's writing from her home and workplace. The entries, however, were unlike anything investigators expected to find. The journal began with a coherent entry dated September 9, 2003, the day after the family's disappearance. "Lost. Need to find Jerry and kids. Ran when the man showed us the cave. Heard screaming. Think it was Emma. So cold tonight. We'll try to reach ranger station tomorrow. The next entry, dated September, found Tyler's shoe by the steam vent. No sign of him. Saw someone watching me from the trees. Thought it was Jay. But when I called out, he ran. Don't think it was Jay. Hiding now. Too scared to find help. The entries continued sporadically through September and October, becoming increasingly disjointed and paranoid. October 3. They are watching the roads and trails. Can't go to rangers. Not safe. The water tastes wrong here. My skin feels strange. October 17. Saw Jay today. He didn't recognize me. Called his name and he looked through me like I wasn't there. His eyes were wrong. Following him now. October 31. The pools speak. The earth breathes here. Emma came to me in a dream and showed me where to go. She's waiting below. November 14. The cold doesn't bother me anymore. The steam keeps me warm. They can't find me if I stay near the vents. Jay comes and goes. He's looking for something in the pools. The final legible entry was dated January. We are becoming part of this place now. The ranger was right. The pools want us. Tyler has already gone into the blue one. Emma will follow when spring comes. Jay doesn't fight it anymore. I alone remember what we were before. Soon I won't remember either. If you find this, don't look for us. You will only find what we left behind. The journal sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The entries suggested a descent into either extreme psychological distress, hallucination, or some form of delusion possibly induced by exposure, trauma, or even toxic gases from geothermal features, which in high concentrations can cause confusion and altered mental states. Yet interwoven with the apparent delusions were concrete details that matched the known evidence. Tyler's shoe near a thermal feature, the multiple sightings of James, and Katherine's apparent survival through the early winter. Toxicologists and medical experts were consulted. They confirmed that certain compounds found in Yellowstone's thermal areas, particularly hydrogen sulfide and other gases, could potentially cause hallucinations, paranoia, and dissociative states if inhaled in sufficient quantities over time. The journal paints a picture of a woman experiencing some form of psychosis, explained Dr. Elaine Winters, a forensic psychiatrist who consulted on the case. Whether this was induced by environmental factors, trauma, or an underlying condition exacerbated by extreme stress, we can't say with certainty. But it suggests that Katherine Mitchell was alive for months after the initial disappearance, living in a progressively deteriorating mental state. The search continued with renewed urgency. If Katherine had been alive as recently as January, and if the March trail camera image truly showed her and Emma, there was still a possibility that some members of the family could be found alive, though perhaps in dire condition both physically and mentally. Teams focused particularly on the thermal areas mentioned obliquely in the journal. These dangerous regions of the park, with their unstable ground and pools of scalding water, were approached with extreme caution. On April 17, 5 days after the discovery of the journal, a search dog alerted near a small, milky blue hot spring in a remote area northwest of the mud volcano. The spring, approximately 15 feet in diameter, was surrounded by a thin crust of silica deposits that made the ground around it treacherous and unstable. Using specialized equipment to test the water and surrounding area from a safe distance, investigators made a grim discovery. Organic material that preliminary field tests indicated was of human origin was present in the pool. Due to the dangerous nature of the thermal feature with water temperatures exceeding 180 degrees Fahrenheit and high acidity, recovery efforts would require specialized equipment and expertise. The National Park Service brought in experts from their Submerged Resources Center who had experience with underwater recovery in challenging environments. The recovery operation was painstaking and dangerous. Using remote-operated submersible equipment, the team explored the hot spring, which proved to be deeper than initially estimated, nearly 30 feet at its center. with a complex underlying cave system through which the superheated water circulated. What they recovered from the pool would provide the first definitive evidence of the fate of at least one member of the Mitchell family. Several bone fragments, later confirmed through DNA testing to belong to Tyler Mitchell, were found at the bottom of the pool. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of investigators and the Mitchell family's relatives. At least one member of the family had died in the park, apparently by falling or entering into a thermal feature. Yet the circumstances surrounding how Tyler ended up in the pool remained unclear. Katherine's journal entry suggesting Tyler has already gone into the blue one implied some sort of voluntary action or at least awareness on her part of what had happened to her son, a disturbing possibility that raised even more questions about the family's mental state and experiences after their disappearance. As April turned to May and the search continued, the scattered pieces of evidence painted an increasingly disturbing picture of a family that had somehow survived for months in Yellowstone's wilderness, apparently experiencing progressive psychological deterioration, while separated and reuniting only occasionally. The working theory evolved. Perhaps the family had indeed encountered someone impersonating a ranger who led them to a remote area, as suggested by Emma's notebook. Perhaps this encounter resulted in the family becoming separated while fleeing, with Tyler becoming lost and ultimately meeting a tragic end in a thermal feature. Katherine, James, and possibly Emma had survived longer, but in a state of increasing mental distress, perhaps exacerbated by exposure to toxic gases, trauma, and extreme survival conditions. Yet this theory, while fitting some of the evidence, still couldn't explain everything, particularly why James and Katherine, both experienced outdoor enthusiasts with knowledge of Yellowstone they had visited twice before, wouldn't have made their way to safety or sought help if they were physically able to do so. The most disturbing possibility that something in their experience had changed them so profoundly that they no longer wanted to be found lingered unspoken among the investigation team. As spring fully arrived in Yellowstone and the last snows melted from all but the highest elevations, the search for the remaining members of the Mitchell family continued with diminishing returns. No further journal entries were found. No additional clothing or personal items were recovered. The trail cameras, still deployed throughout the park, captured no more images of figures resembling the missing family members. It was as if they had vanished once again, or perhaps, as Katherine's final journal entry eerily suggested, they had somehow become part of this place now. The investigation remained officially active, but as May turned to June and the summer tourist season began anew, resources were gradually redirected. The case file grew thick with reports, witness statements, expert analyses and theories, but definitive answers remained elusive. For the extended Mitchell family, the recovery of Tyler's remains provided a measure of closure, albeit a painful one. A memorial service was held in Portland on May 30, 2004, attended by hundreds of people from the community. Pictures of all four family members were displayed prominently, as James, Katherine, and Emma remained officially missing. "We still hope for answers," said Robert Mitchell at the service. "We still hope that somehow, somewhere, the rest of our family will be found." That hope would be tested in ways no one could have anticipated. When, in early July 2004, nearly 10 months after the Mitchell family disappeared, a fourth and final trail camera image would surface, one that would add the most inexplicable chapter yet to the already mystifying case. The image, captured by a camera positioned near the original Ferry Falls trailhead, where the family's Ford Explorer had been found, showed four figures standing together at the edge of the forest at 3:42 a.m. on July 7. The infrared flash illuminated them clearly enough to see that they appeared to be wearing tattered versions of the clothing James, Katherine, Emma, and Tyler Mitchell had been wearing when they disappeared. All four were looking directly at the camera. None of their faces were clearly distinguishable due to the limitations of the night vision technology, but their heights and builds corresponded to those of the Mitchell family, including Tyler, whose remains had been recovered from the hot spring 2 months earlier. The timestamp on the image indicated it had been taken just 36 hours before the memory card was collected and the image discovered. The inexplicable nature of this final piece of evidence would cement the Mitchell family disappearance as one of the most baffling mysteries in the history of America's national parks, a case that remains officially open to this day, with questions far outnumbering answers. What really happened to the Mitchell family in Yellowstone National Park in September? Perhaps, as some continue to believe, the truth still waits to be discovered somewhere in the vast wilderness, where they vanished, a truth as strange and unsettling as the otherworldly landscape of Yellowstone itself. The image of four figures standing together in the darkness, captured on July 7, 2004. Nearly 10 months after the Mitchell family's disappearance, defied rational explanation. The digital timestamp confirmed it hadn't been tampered with. The camera had been functioning normally, capturing wildlife before and after the puzzling image. And most disturbing of all, one of those figures appeared to be Tyler Mitchell, whose partial remains had been recovered from a thermal pool 2 months earlier. It was as if we'd crossed some line between a standard missing persons case and something else, reflected FBI Special Agent Thomas Reardon years later. We deal in evidence, in facts, but sometimes the facts don't fit any framework we have for understanding them. The discovery of this fourth trail camera image plunged the investigation into chaos. Some team members insisted there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps the remains identified as Tyler's actually belonged to someone else, despite the DNA match. Perhaps the image showed a different family who happened to resemble the Mitchells. Perhaps someone was deliberately manipulating the investigation, though the remoteness of the camera locations and the technical difficulty of faking such images argued against this. Chief Ranger Daniel Norris, who had been involved in the case from the beginning, found himself in an impossible position. We had scientific evidence proving that Tyler Mitchell was deceased. We also had photographic evidence suggesting he was alive. Both couldn't be true. The paradox presented by this final trail camera image would never be fully resolved, but it forced investigators to expand their thinking and consider possibilities that went beyond conventional explanations. By mid-July 2004, the Mitchell case had developed a devoted following online. Web forums dedicated to discussing the disappearance had thousands of members. Amateur sleuths combed through publicly available information, developing theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Several true crime podcasts, still in their infancy as a medium in 2004, featured episodes on the case. The Mitchell family website, maintained by Katherine's sister Jennifer Walsh, received hundreds of thousands of visitors. The reward for information had grown to $250,000, funded by contributions from family, friends, and concerned citizens captivated by the mystery. "We never wanted to be at the center of a true crime story," Jennifer said in a rare media appearance. "But if public interest helps find answers, then we will use that interest however we can." The publication of the final trail camera image released by the FBI in hopes that someone might recognize the individuals if they weren't the Mitchells sent shockwaves through both the official investigation and the online community following the case. The image, grainy and otherworldly in its night vision green tones, became iconic, appearing on television specials, true crime magazines, and countless websites. Some observers noted the strange, almost ritual-like positioning of the figures standing in a perfect semicircle at the forest's edge, all facing the camera as if they knew it was there. Others pointed out the unnatural stillness of their postures, with not even the slightest motion blur despite the camera's relatively slow shutter speed in night mode. "They look like they are posing for a family portrait," observed one online commentator. "But in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, 10 months after they vanished." The paradox of Tyler's apparent presence in the image when his remains had been confirmed led to wild speculation. Some suggested the family had been cloned, replaced by doppelgangers, or were manifesting as spirits. Others proposed more grounded theories. Perhaps Tyler had a twin no one knew about, or maybe the remains found weren't actually his, despite the DNA match. Law enforcement officials dismissed such theories publicly, while privately struggling to develop a coherent explanation that accounted for all the evidence. The investigation continued along multiple tracks. One team focused on the possibility that someone was deliberately manipulating the case, perhaps by wearing clothing that resembled the Mitchells or by tampering with the trail cameras. Another explored the environmental angle, whether exposure to toxic gases from thermal features could explain Katherine's journal entries and the family's bizarre behavior. A third investigated the fake ranger lead, trying to identify anyone who might have been impersonating a park employee in the months before the Mitchells' disappearance. None of these investigative threads yielded conclusive results. Camera experts confirmed that the trail camera images showed no signs of tampering. Toxicologists determined that while geothermal gases could cause confusion, hallucinations, and even death, they were unlikely to explain the months-long survival and peculiar behavior documented in the case. And despite an extensive review of park employment records and visitor reports, no suspect emerged as the possible impersonator mentioned in Emma's notebook. As summer progressed, the search for the missing Mitchell family members continued, though with diminishing resources as other cases demanded attention. The paradoxical evidence had created a sense of futility among some investigators, who privately believed the case would never be solved. Then, in early August 2004, a new witness came forward with information that would add yet another layer to the already complex case. Howard Fenton, a 62-year-old retired geology professor from the University of Wyoming, contacted the FBI after seeing the final trail camera image on a television program. Fenton had been conducting independent research on Yellowstone's geothermal features for decades, focusing particularly on lesser-known thermal areas that weren't popular tourist destinations. In September 2003, the same month the Mitchell family disappeared, Fenton had been in Yellowstone collecting water samples from remote hot springs for analysis. On September 7, the day before the Mitchells vanished, he encountered a man in the backcountry who he initially believed was a park ranger. He was very knowledgeable about the thermal features, Fenton told investigators. He talked about the underground connections between certain pools, about water chemistry, about the microscopic organisms that live in extreme environments. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but he had a name badge that looked official. I assumed he was a researcher or specialized ranger. The man, whom Fenton described as in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and intense eyes, had been particularly interested in Fenton's research on what locals called ghost pools, thermal features that seemed to appear and disappear over time as underground water channels shifted. He told me there were thermal pools in Yellowstone that had unique properties, Fenton recalled. He said some of them were doorways or thresholds. I thought he was speaking metaphorically at the time, about how they connected different underground systems, but the way he talked about them, it was almost religious. He said these special pools only revealed themselves to certain people, that they had been sacred to Native Americans for centuries before the park was established. Most disturbing was what the man told Fenton as they parted ways. He said he was preparing one of these special pools for a family who was ready to cross over. I thought he meant he was going to give them a guided tour or something. It didn't seem threatening at the time, just odd phrasing. Fenton had thought little of the encounter until he saw the news about the missing family and the subsequent discoveries. Even then, he hadn't immediately connected the two until seeing the final trail camera image on television. There was something about seeing those four figures standing there that brought it all back, he said. The way that man had talked about families and thresholds and crossing over, I should have come forward sooner. Fenton worked with a police sketch artist to create a composite of the man he had met. The resulting image was circulated among park employees, local residents, and the public, but no identification was made. The man, whoever he was, seemed to have vanished as completely as the Mitchell family themselves. The encounter Fenton described aligned with the fake ranger theory, and with the mention in Emma's notebook about meeting a ranger who had said something about thermal pools that troubled her father. It suggested that someone had deliberately targeted the Mitchell family, though the motive remained unclear. As August turned to September 2004, marking 1 year since the family's disappearance, attention to the case intensified once again. Media outlets produced anniversary specials. The Mitchell family held a memorial service in Portland, though they continued to emphasize that they had not given up hope of finding James, Katherine, and Emma alive. Tyler's funeral had been held earlier that summer after his remains were released by authorities. The small blue casket was symbolic. The recovered remains had been too fragmentary for a traditional viewing, but it provided his grandparents and extended family with a focal point for their grief. "We know where Tyler is now," said Robert Mitchell at the memorial service. "He's at peace, but we need to find the rest of our family, whether they are in this world or the next." The investigation, now classified as a cold case, though still actively pursued, continued to yield occasional new information. Park visitors who had been in Yellowstone in September 2003 came forward with photographs that were analyzed for any glimpse of the Mitchell family or the unidentified man who might have been impersonating a ranger. In one such photo, taken at the Old Faithful viewing area on September 8, 2003, the day the family disappeared, investigators noticed a man in the background who bore a resemblance to Fenton's description and sketch. The man appeared to be watching the Mitchell family from a distance. Though his face wasn't clearly visible, his posture and attention seemed focused on the family rather than on the geyser that everyone else was photographing. Digital enhancement of the image couldn't provide a definitive identification, but it added credence to the theory that the family had been observed and possibly targeted by someone in the park that day. Another visitor's photo, taken along the Ferry Falls Trail on the same day, captured what appeared to be the same man walking ahead of the Mitchell family on the trail, glancing back at them. The timestamp on the digital image placed it at 3:17 p.m., shortly before the family was believed to have disappeared. These photographic discoveries, while tantalizing, couldn't definitively prove that this individual had led the Mitchells off trail or was responsible for their disappearance. But they established a pattern of someone taking an unusual interest in the family throughout their final day in the park. "We believe this individual, whoever he is key to understanding what happened to the Mitchells," said Agent Reardon at a press briefing in September 2004. "We are asking anyone who may have encountered this man in Yellowstone or who recognizes him to come forward." No one did. As the investigation approached its 1-year mark with more questions than answers, a decision was made to return to the Blue Thermal Pool, where Tyler's remains had been discovered. The initial recovery operation had been necessarily limited due to the dangerous conditions, but advances in remote-operated submersible technology now allowed for a more thorough examination of the pool and its underlying cave system. On September 22, 2004, a specialized team from the National Park Service and the FBI began a 3-day operation at the site, using a remotely operated vehicle ROV, equipped with high-definition cameras and sample collection tools. They explored the thermal feature in greater detail than had been possible during the initial recovery. What they discovered deep within the underwater cave system connected to the pool defied easy explanation. Approximately 40 feet below the surface, in a submerged chamber that opened off the main thermal vent, the ROV's lights illuminated what appeared to be a makeshift altar or shrine. A flat rock shelf, clearly arranged by human hands, held several items. Tyler's other shoe, matching the one found months earlier, a woman's wristwatch identical to one Katherine had been wearing in the last confirmed photos of the family, a man's wedding band consistent with the one James wore, and a violin string that could have come from Emma's instrument. Most disturbing of all, the items had been arranged in a deliberate pattern around a central object, a small, smooth stone carved with unfamiliar symbols. "The arrangement couldn't have occurred naturally," explained Dr. Laura Vargas, a geologist who consulted on the operation. "These items were deliberately placed in this underwater chamber by someone or multiple people who would have needed specialized diving equipment to reach it." The water temperature in that chamber is approximately 106 degrees Fahrenheit, uncomfortably hot, but not immediately lethal to a protected diver. The discovery raised profound questions. Who had created this underwater shrine? When had it been placed there? And perhaps most importantly, how did it relate to the Mitchell family's disappearance? Forensic analysis confirmed that the watch was indeed Katherine's. Her initials were engraved on the back, and the wedding band matched the description and size of James's ring. The violin string could not be definitively linked to Emma's instrument, but it was consistent with the type she used according to her music teacher. The carved stone proved more enigmatic. The symbols didn't match any known writing system or established religious iconography. Several anthropologists and archaeologists who examined photographs of the stone noted some similarities to certain Native American pictographs found in the region, but none could provide a definitive interpretation or cultural context. Whatever this arrangement represents, it appears to be significant to understanding what happened to the Mitchell family, said Agent Reardon. But whether it was created by them for them or by someone else entirely remains unclear. The underwater shrine added another layer of inexplicable evidence to a case already overflowing with mysteries. If the items had indeed been placed by a diver, it suggested a level of premeditation and specialized equipment that pointed to an elaborate plan rather than a chance encounter gone wrong. Yet this theory failed to explain why the family would have followed a stranger off-trail in the first place, or why James and Katherine would later be seen wandering separately in the park's backcountry. As investigators struggled to incorporate this new discovery into their understanding of the case, October arrived, bringing colder temperatures and the first snows to the higher elevations of Yellowstone. The window for fieldwork was closing once again, and the investigation had to contend with the likelihood that any remaining evidence in the park would soon be buried under winter snows. On October 15, 2004, 13 months after the Mitchell family disappeared, a routine patrol near the Madison River made a discovery that briefly seemed to promise a breakthrough in the case. Ranger Michael Harlow was checking backcountry campsites for the last remaining visitors of the season when he noticed something unusual in a stand of lodgepole pines about half a mile from the road. A tree had been carved with a series of symbols that appeared identical to those found on the stone in the underwater shrine. Below the symbols, carved in a different hand, were the initials EM, potentially Emma Mitchell. The carving appeared relatively fresh, with the exposed wood still light in color rather than weathered gray. Dendrochronologists who examined the carving estimated it had been made within the past 3 to 6 months, well after the family's disappearance, but potentially before the final trail camera image in July. A thorough search of the surrounding area revealed no other signs of the missing family members, but the carving established a connection between the surface world and the mysterious underwater shrine. The symbols were identical, suggesting that whoever had knowledge of them had been both in the underwater chamber and at this location near the Madison River. If the initials were indeed Emma's, it suggested she had been alive and in this area sometime in the spring or summer of 2004. But like so much of the evidence in the case, this discovery raised as many questions as it answered. "We believe the symbols may represent some kind of code or message," said Agent Reardon. "We are consulting with cryptographers and linguistic experts to determine if they have any decipherable meaning." The symbols defied easy interpretation. Some experts suggested they might be a form of ciphertext, a coded message using a substitution system for letters of the alphabet. Others believed they might be ideograms representing concepts rather than specific words or sounds. Still others proposed they might be purely decorative or ritual in nature, without linguistic meaning. Whatever their purpose, the symbols linked 2 locations in Yellowstone that were miles apart: the underwater shrine in the thermal pool where Tyler's remains were found, and this seemingly random stand of trees near the Madison River. They provided a tangible connection that suggested deliberate movement and activity, possibly by Emma Mitchell during the months after the family's initial disappearance. As October progressed, The search expanded to include other areas along the Madison River corridor. Rangers and FBI agents looked for additional trees with similar carvings, hoping to establish a pattern or trail that might lead to more conclusive evidence. On October 23, a second carved tree was found approximately 2 miles downstream from the first. This one contained the same symbols, but without the initials. A third was discovered on October 25, another mile further along the river, again with the symbols but no initials. It appeared to be a trail of sorts, explained Ranger Norris, as if someone was marking a path using these symbols as guideposts. The question that haunted investigators was where this path led, and whether following it might finally resolve the mystery of what had happened to the Mitchell family. As October ended and November began, with snowfall increasing and temperatures dropping, the window for field investigation was rapidly closing. A decision was made to follow the trail of carved trees to its conclusion, however far it might lead, before winter made such work impossible. The fourth carved tree was found on November 2, again following the general course of the Madison River, but now veering away from the water into a densely forested area. The fifth, discovered on November 4, was nearly 2 miles from the river in rugged terrain that showed no signs of established trails or regular human presence. The sixth and final carved tree, located on November 7, stood alone in a small clearing approximately 12 miles from where the first carving had been discovered. This tree was different from the others. Rather than a single set of symbols, it was covered with repetitive carvings that spiraled around the trunk from ground level to about 7 feet high. The same symbols appeared over and over, obsessively carved into every available inch of the trunk. At the base of the tree, partially buried under fallen pine needles and soil, searchers found a small leather-bound book. Unlike Katherine's journal discovered months earlier, this book contained no conventional writing. Instead, its pages were filled with the same symbols that appeared on the trees and the underwater stone, meticulously drawn in what appeared to be ink. Forensic analysis of the book revealed fingerprints matching both Emma and Katherine Mitchell, suggesting they had both handled it extensively. The ink used for the symbols was confirmed to be commercial ballpoint pen ink, consistent with pens the family had brought on their trip. Most surprisingly, the final pages of the book contained what appeared to be a hand-drawn map, though it didn't correspond precisely to any standard topographical representation of Yellowstone. Certain features were recognizable: the rough outline of Yellowstone Lake, several major rivers, and what seemed to be thermal areas marked with special symbols. One location on the map was circled repeatedly and marked with a symbol that appeared nowhere else in the book: a small spiral surrounded by 7 dots. This location, when correlated with actual Yellowstone geography, corresponded to a remote thermal area in the park's Pelican Valley, one of the most isolated and rarely visited regions of Yellowstone, known for its grizzly bear activity and dangerous terrain. "The map gave us a specific destination," said Agent Worden. "For the first time, we had a clear indication of where at least one member of the Mitchell family might have been heading." Despite the advancing winter conditions, a specialized team was assembled to investigate the location marked on the map. The operation was considered high risk due to both the environmental conditions and the uncertainty about what might be found. If members of the Mitchell family were still in the area, they would have endured more than a year in the wilderness, including one full winter, which seemed almost impossible from a survival standpoint. Yet the trail camera images, the carvings, and now the book and map suggested that something far outside the bounds of ordinary explanation was occurring. The investigation had reached a point where conventional assumptions about survival, behavior, and even identity had been repeatedly challenged by the evidence. On November 12, 2004, a team consisting of 4 park rangers, 2 FBI agents, and a wilderness medicine specialist set out for the location identified on the map. Due to snow conditions, they traveled by snowmobile as far as possible, then continued on snowshoes for the final 7 miles. The temperature hovered around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, with light snow falling intermittently. They reached the marked location shortly before sunset, a small valley containing several thermal features, with steam rising from hot springs and mud pots in the fading light. The area was unmistakably active geothermally, with the distinctive rotten egg smell of hydrogen sulfide permeating the air. In the center of the valley stood a thermal pool, unlike those typically found in Yellowstone. Rather than the vivid blues, greens, or oranges common to the park's hot springs, this pool was an unusual opaque white, like milk glass. Its surface showed no ripples despite the light breeze, giving it an unnatural stillness that several team members later described as unsettling. Around the pool's perimeter, partially covered by the recent snowfall, they found 7 stones arranged in a perfect circle. Each stone had been carved with one of the symbols from the book and trees. Most significant of all was what they discovered at the edge of the pool: 4 sets of footprints in the thin layer of mud and mineral deposits. The prints led directly to the pool's edge and stopped. There were no returning footprints. Measurements and photographs taken at the scene confirmed that the footprints were consistent with the shoe sizes of James, Katherine, Emma, and Tyler Mitchell, and based on the lack of weathering and erosion, geologists estimated they had been made within the past 48 hours. Despite Tyler's partial remains having been recovered months earlier, it was as if the entire family had walked up to this pool, and Agent Reardon paused, struggling to find the words to complete his thought, and stepped in. Tests of the pool revealed it to be approximately 9 feet deep, with a temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, exactly normal human body temperature, which was highly unusual for a thermal feature in Yellowstone. More unusual still was the discovery that the pool had no apparent bottom chamber or vent. Ground-penetrating radar showed only solid rock beneath the 9 feet of milky water. No human remains were found in the pool. No clothing, personal items, or other evidence of the Mitchell family was discovered in the immediate area beyond the footprints. As night fell and temperatures dropped further, the search team was forced to make camp nearby, planning to continue their investigation in the morning. Throughout the night, several team members reported hearing what they described as whispers, or singing, that seemed to emanate from the direction of the white pool, though none could make out distinct words or melodies. By morning, the pool had vanished. In its place was bare ground, not even damp, with no trace of the milky water that had filled it the evening before. The 7 carved stones remained in their circle, but the footprints had disappeared along with the pool itself. "We questioned our own observations," admitted Ranger Norris. "We had photographs, measurements, water samples, empirical evidence that the pool had existed. But how does a 9-foot deep body of water simply vanish overnight without leaving so much as a damp spot?" The discovery and subsequent disappearance of the white pool marked the effective end of the active investigation into the Mitchell family case. The evidence had led to a phenomenon that defied conventional explanation: a thermal feature that existed and then didn't, that somehow connected to the symbols found on trees, in a hidden underwater shrine, and in a book handled by at least 2 family members. The footprints leading to the pool's edge, matching all 4 family members, including Tyler, whose partial remains had been recovered months earlier, created a paradox that no investigative framework could adequately address. In December 2004, the Mitchell case was officially classified as inactive pending new information. The FBI compiled a comprehensive case file running to thousands of pages, detailing every piece of evidence, witness statement, and investigative step taken over the 15 months since the family's disappearance. The official conclusion, such as it was, suggested that the Mitchell family had likely been victims of environmental factors and possible third-party involvement. The report acknowledged the many inconsistencies and unexplained elements of the case, but stopped short of endorsing any specific theory about what had ultimately happened to the family. James, Katherine, and Emma Mitchell remained officially listed as missing persons. Tyler Mitchell was listed as deceased based on the DNA identification of his remains from the thermal pool. For the extended Mitchell family, the lack of conclusive answers prolonged their grief and prevented full closure. Yet as the years passed, most came to accept that they would likely never know exactly what happened in Yellowstone in September. The case never entirely faded from public consciousness. Occasional articles, television specials, and online discussions kept the mystery alive. Several books were written about the disappearance, ranging from straightforward accounts of the investigation to more speculative works that embraced supernatural or paranormal explanations. Howard Fenton, the retired geology professor who had encountered the man possibly impersonating a ranger, devoted his remaining years to researching what he called transitional thermal features in Yellowstone hot springs and pools that seemed to appear and disappear unpredictably. His work, largely dismissed by mainstream geology, nonetheless attracted a following among those interested in the Mitchell case and other unexplained phenomena associated with Yellowstone. Fenton died in 2011 without finding definitive answers, but his research notes contained a striking observation made shortly before his death. The white pool is not a destination, but a threshold. The symbols are not a language but a key. The Mitchells were not the first to cross over, nor will they be the last. In September 2013, on the 10-year anniversary of the Mitchell family's disappearance, the case briefly returned to national attention. A memorial service was held in Portland, attended by aging relatives, former colleagues, and friends who had kept the family's memory alive. At the same time, in Yellowstone, a small ceremony was held at the location where the Mitchells' Ford Explorer had been found a decade earlier. Park officials unveiled a small plaque commemorating the family and reminding visitors of the importance of staying on marked trails and taking proper safety precautions in the wilderness. The ceremony was attended by several rangers who had been involved in the original investigation, including Daniel Norris, now retired. After the official proceedings, Norris remained at the site alone for a time, looking out at the landscape where so much of his career had been devoted to a mystery that was never solved. As he later recounted to a documentary filmmaker working on a retrospective about the case, it was then that he noticed something peculiar in the tree line at the edge of the parking area. At first I thought it was just the light playing tricks, Norris said. But then I saw them clearly, 4 figures standing among the trees, watching the ceremony. A man, a woman, a teenage girl, and a boy. Norris, who had known the Mitchell family only through photographs and evidence, nevertheless immediately recognized them. They were wearing the same clothing they had been wearing when they disappeared, though it showed no signs of the decade of wear one would expect. They appeared, by his account, exactly as they had in 2003, not having aged a day. They didn't seem threatening or ghostly, Norris insisted. They looked at peace. The woman, Katherine, smiled at me. Then they turned and walked into the forest together. I followed, of course, but they were gone. No trail, no footprints, nothing. Norris never publicly shared this experience beyond the documentary interview, concerned for his professional reputation. But privately, he expressed a sense of closure, believing that whatever had happened to the Mitchell family, they had somehow remained together. I don't have an explanation that fits any conventional framework, he admitted, but I know what I saw, and I believe they found something in Yellowstone, something most of us will never understand. The Mitchell family case remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in the history of America's national park system. The evidence trail camera images of family members months after their disappearance, including one who was confirmed deceased. Katherine's increasingly disjointed journal, the underwater shrine, the carved trees, the book of symbols, the map leading to a thermal pool that existed and then didn't, and finally, the footprints of all 4 family members leading to that pool's edge creates a narrative that defies conventional explanation. Some investigators who worked the case came to believe that the Mitchell family had encountered something in Yellowstone that exists outside our normal understanding of reality, perhaps a phenomenon connected to the unique geothermal properties of the park, perhaps something older and more mysterious that the symbols in the book and on the trees were attempting to describe. Others maintained that there must be a logical explanation, perhaps involving a skilled wilderness survivalist who targeted the family, elaborate tampering with evidence, or even a complex hoax, though none could fully explain the totality of the evidence. What is known with certainty is that on September 8, 2003, the Mitchell family, James, Katherine, Emma, and Tyler, walked into the wilderness of Yellowstone National Park and never returned to the lives they had known before. Whether they met with tragedy, transformation, or something else entirely remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the American wilderness. Over the years, visitors to Yellowstone occasionally report strange sightings in remote areas of the park. A family walking together at dusk, far from established trails, whispers emanating from thermal pools, trees marked with unusual symbols, or the appearance of a milky white hot spring that isn't documented on any official park map. Park rangers typically attribute such reports to imagination, misidentification, or the natural tendency to connect unrelated phenomena to famous unsolved mysteries. The official policy is to remind visitors to stay on marked trails and avoid approaching wildlife or thermal features, standard safety precautions that have nothing to do with the Mitchell case specifically. Yet some rangers, particularly those who worked in the park in 2003 and 2004, treat these reports with more seriousness than they might publicly admit. Several have privately acknowledged keeping an eye out for a family of 4 who seem somehow out of place or time, or for the distinctive symbols found in Emma's book. In the autumn of 2023, 20 years after the Mitchell family vanished, a young ranger on her first season in Yellowstone was checking backcountry camping permits near Shoshone Lake when she encountered a teenage girl sitting alone by the shore. The girl was writing in a small leather-bound book and looked up as the ranger approached. "She asked me if I knew about the white pool," the ranger later reported. "I said I didn't, and she smiled like she had a secret. She said it only appears to people who are ready to see it, ready to cross over. Then she thanked me and walked into the forest before I could respond." The ranger, feeling unsettled by the encounter, later looked up the Mitchell case in the park's historical records. She was shocked to find that the girl she had met matched the description and appearance of Emma Mitchell, not as she would be at 35 years old in 2023, but as she had been at 15 when she disappeared in 20. By the time the ranger reported the encounter to her supervisors and a search team returned to the area, there was no sign of the girl. The only evidence that remained was a single page torn from a book, left on a rock near where she had been sitting. On it were drawn the now familiar symbols found in the Mitchell case, arranged in a new pattern around a central spiral. At the bottom of the page, in neat handwriting, was a message that continues to haunt those familiar with the case. "We are still here, in the spaces between. The pool opens when it's needed. Look for the symbols. They will guide you home." The page was added to the Mitchell case file, which remains officially inactive, but never truly closed, a mystery that continues to ripple through time, challenging our understanding of what is possible and what may exist beyond the boundaries of the world we think we know. In Yellowstone, as steam rises from the earth and thermal pools shimmer in colors that seem almost otherworldly, rangers still occasionally glimpse what appears to be a family of 4 walking together in the distance, always just out of reach, forever suspended in that moment in 2003 when they stepped away from the known world and into legend.